Pete Mundo in the morning with you on 710 KCMO. It's great to be here. As we know, welcome in Ron Estes, serving the 4th District of Kansas for about a year now. And Congressman, we really appreciate you joining us. It's been a year for you. How has that first year been different than you might have expected?
Well, Pete, thanks for having me on this morning. It's been a phenomenal year. Just the things that we've been involved in, opportunity to get exposed to so many things going on in Washington. There's 2 or 3 takeaways that I have from that standpoint. One of them is that we end up putting off so many decisions that really just slows down the process. And in general, the process is fairly broken from that standpoint. It's tough to make decisions. It's tough to get things moving forward.
Now, what you've seen, I mean, obviously President Trump was there and is there to drain the swamp, and that's kind of been his MO. But how, you've now seen it for a year. You were kind of an outsider, obviously, didn't have much experience on that end or just seeing it firsthand. So how deep and how bad is that swamp?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we see now is, the Democrats, particularly in the Senate, are actually actively working against the president, which they've picked that as a shrewd political move, but it's kind of coming out as a disservice to the country. The president's had to wait so long to get his cabinet secretaries confirmed, undersecretaries, ambassadors, and what that's done is it's slowed down the agenda that he was elected on, that we all voted for him for because we wanted that effort. And what we've seen is he's still doing a lot. I mean, he can do a lot as executive orders. He can do a lot working with us in Congress for the things that we were able to get passed through both the House and the Senate. And so we're making some progress. It's just slow and tedious, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
That's kind of how it feels like, certainly from the outside looking in, as we are being joined by Congressman Ron Estes, serving the 4th District in Kansas, joining us here in studio on KCMO. It kind of put this together in the past 24 hours pretty quickly. I'm glad we made it happen. We were talking a lot this morning about the tariffs and what President Trump has been saying here, and even Republicans are fairly split on this and whether or not it's going to work and be a positive and if it's going to create serious change for the American economy. Where do you stand on what's been going on here over the past couple of weeks?
Well, I think the right approach is that we want free and fair trade. And what that really means is you don't want tariffs in the long term. So that's what we're struggling with right now. The problem is we've had some countries, I mean, China's the most notable example, who've basically been bad actors. They've been, over time, dumping products, dumping steel, aluminum. Actually, there's issues with intellectual property that's been stolen as well. And so President Trump's really the first person that's standing up and saying, we've got to stop it. And, I applaud his effort, but I want to make sure that we're very deliberate in that process. Because we don't want a trade war. I mean, we want free and fair trade, rather have no tariffs. If we do need tariffs, let's make sure they're specific, they're targeted towards the right country, targeted towards the right products. And that's the direction we're headed in. But as you go down this route, what we've seen time and time again over the last 30, 40 years in trade negotiations is when a country has been a bad actor in a situation like that, and you start the discussions about tariffs or stopping their actions, then you get into a little bit of retaliation. They come up with some false claims and throw tariffs on stuff that's completely unrelated, whether it's soybeans or other issues and farm equipment. And so what that really ultimately ends up in is a little bit of that tit for tat at the beginning, but then people say, okay, we're really serious. We need to sit down and have that dialogue. And that's really the next step is let's sit down now and have that serious dialogue. Let's focus on those actions that need to be improved, need to be changed in order to help that free and fair trade.
I think you're right, because a lot of people think that we're in a trade war now. We're not. This is like 2 people basically yelling at each other, and now it's like, let's get to the table and have a discussion. But this discussion, I think there's a 6-month window to make this happen. So, should there be concern from people that have money invested in the markets, that obviously that's been up and down with all this discussion? How quickly can something like this actually happen and take effect?
I think you do see a little bit of a turmoil in the short term when you have this type of issues. I've seen it multiple times in multiple countries over the last, like I said, 20, 30 years, just from a standpoint of as they go through this type of dialogue back and forth and make sure that the right behavior happens. And so we're stuck a little bit in that turmoil right now. We'd much rather it not be happening this way. We'd rather that China really commits to free and fair trade and actually follows the rules in the World Trade Organization and other agreements And unfortunately, sometimes you have to stand up to a bully and say, you got to change your behavior. So we're having a little bit of short-term turmoil right now, but we'll get through it relatively quickly, come to the table and start seriously negotiating about making sure that the right things happen.
I think there is, though, a little bit of a misconception as we're being joined by Congressman Ron Estes, 4th District, Kansas, in studio here on Mundo in the morning, 710 KCMO, that somehow if we do figure out how to right this ship with China, that we are going to bring back all these manufacturing jobs that we've lost. I don't think that's all that realistic, but there is maybe something else to be gained as well.
I think you're right. I mean, purely all manufacturing jobs aren't going to come back to the United States just because of this discussion around tariffs for China's actions. But because there's a lot more affect that. And so, the tariffs are really focused on these specific issues that they've addressed. I think a broader issue that's going to help us bring back jobs ties back in with the tax cuts and jobs that we passed last year, and some of the regulatory reform that we've done.
And let's dive into that now. That has been what President Trump has done from a reducing regulations perspective, slashing them. That those things don't have to obviously go through Congress, so they kind of get overlooked. But how enormous has that been for this economic boom over the past 18 months?
I think we've seen some phenomenal changes. I mean, the president really got on the board quickly with some executive orders, directed his cabinet secretaries to actually focus on some regulatory changes. We've been able to get several things through both the House and the Senate in terms of Congressional Review Act to overturn some of that burdensome regulation that came out of the Obama administration. And what we're seeing now is the economy's growing. The last 3 quarters, we've seen roughly 3% economic growth, which is nearly double what it was for the previous 10 years. And what that does, it translates into more jobs, translates into more money in people's pockets. In December, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and moving forward there, we've seen 400 different companies across the country have announced either bonuses or salary increases for their employees, which affected over 4 million employees. They're having more money in their pocket now because of that. February, the new withholding tables changed, so we're seeing people that have more take-home pay. This April 15th is coming up quickly. This is going to be the last year that we have to do your taxes under the old method, and so we can move forward and look forward to next year. And part of it's still to come, just from the standpoint of the benefits. As all of these companies that have had money parked overseas, been trapped because of the tax code, are starting to repatriate that money back. Apple announced that they're bringing roughly $300 billion back in the United States. That's going to be available to invest in new plants, hire new employees, maybe pay out as dividends, which is going to help pensions or help stock owners, or even buying back stock, which is going to help that. And so we're seeing a lot of growth that's still to come, and we need to be prepared for that. We need to make sure we have skilled people in the workforce ready to work at that. And, we're already seeing the lowest unemployment in 20 years, so we've got to work to continue to keep that economic growth.
It really is exciting what the president and all of Congress has done in getting this tax bill through and passing it, as we're being joined in studio by Congressman Ron Estes. He is here serving the 4th District of Kansas, in town this morning. Just so happened we could get together. On that tax bill in particular, though, when you look at the new rates people are getting, you hear from some of your friends on the other side of the aisle that this is peanuts or this is scraps. And it just shows an out-of-touchness with the average American who says, whatever it is, 40, 50, $100 a paycheck, that's money.
It really is. And, that in Kansas, the average family of 4 is going to get approximately $2,000 in reduction in taxes. So that's money that's in their pocket. And Nancy Pelosi called that crumbs. I mean,
yes.
They called it the tax bill in Armageddon, and it was the worst bill that they'd ever seen. And they're out of touch. They really don't understand what pressures working men and women have for themselves, for their families, and how much money that's going to mean back in their pocket. They can use it for their retirement, for their kids' education, use it to make a down payment on a car. It's really important for people to have their own money in back. They're going to make a whole lot better choices of how to spend their money than the federal government is. And so we want to make sure that people have that opportunity. So we worked on not only some tax reform, but also cuts in rates for individuals, for international corporations, larger businesses that do a lot of international business, as well as small businesses. I mean, this was the first time small businesses that were pass-through companies ever got a tax cut in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
What are some things that obviously, your district, South Central Kansas, or when you're here in town in Kansas City, what are some of the bigger issues that you hear from people that they still want addressed from you guys in D.C.?
I think as we look forward for this next year, 2018, we've got several things on the plate we need to do. We need to focus on the Farm Bill, or I call it the Farm and Food Stamp Bill, because 80% of it's related to food stamps. And we need to reauthorize that this year. It's up for reauthorization. We want to make sure that there's a good safety net there, and make sure that there's support there for our farming community. The other thing that we want to look at, and we're pushing pretty hard through the House, is to get some immigration reform done. And that's a really tough process. The Senate showed they couldn't get anything done a couple of months ago. We're working pretty hard with a bill called the Goodlatte-McCall bill that's being led by the chairman of our Judiciary Committee and the chairman of our Homeland Security. And that's going to address some of those issues that we have. Unfortunately, our immigration process is so broken right now. There's so many areas that need to be fixed on that. We've got to continue to push on that and making sure that we get so many of those areas fixed.
U.S. Congressman Ron Estes joining us here on Pete Mundo in the morning on KCMO. Congressman, in terms of looking forward and some of the issues that could or could not be addressed over the past several months, I think we're kind of in the point where everybody's in re-election mode, fundraising mode. I don't know how much is really going to get done before these midterms come through. So what are a realistic things that people can expect? Or do you think, as kind of the new guy on the block, it's going to be a little quiet here these next 6-7 months?
Well, one of the things that really pleased me was this week the chairman of the Judiciary Committee announced that they're bringing forth the balanced budget amendment to the floor of the House, and that's important. We're digging ourselves in a hole in the country. I mean, you look back over the 8 years that President Bush was in office, the national debt doubled roughly from just under $5 trillion to just under $10 trillion. During the 8 years of the Obama administration, it doubled again from just under $10 trillion to just under $20 trillion. Right now, it's gone up $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion since President Trump came into office. We've got to focus on how do we get that turned around. I'm a big supporter of balancing the budget. I mean, I look at my responsibility in Congress is how to make this country better and leave it better off for my kids and their kids in the future, and making sure that we get that focused on. I don't know that a balanced budget amendment is going to get to the Senate as well, so that can't be the only thing that we have to focus on. So we've got to actually look at some realistic things. Look at some of the entitlement and quasi-entitlement programs, because after all, that's over 70% of the budget that we're spending today. Whether it's food stamps, whether it's temporary assistance need, whether it's even Social Security and Medicare, which I classify as quasi-entitlements because people have paid into them, but we haven't paid enough in to offset the cost. And so, if we do a little bit of work now, we can make sure that we can change that for the future and bend that curve that we're on now of having ever-increasing deficits.
Well, Congressman, I can't thank you enough. Congressman Ron Estes, 4th District in Kansas, joining us here on Mundo in the Morning on KCMO. Thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.